Next, from the House chamber in the state capitol, we hear the debate on SB 1, the pension reform bill that proposed changes in future benefits. One of the primary changes was in the automatic 3% annual compounded increase in pension payments. The debate begins with Speaker Michael Madigan explaining what the bill will do. This debate runs about 1 hour and 10 minutes.
The chair recognizes Speaker Madigan.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I come before you today to present the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 1. This is a comprehensive pension reform package that will lead to fiscal stability for the state and its pension systems. Based on the actuarial analysis prepared by the systems, we estimate that this proposal will save the state approximately $160 billion over the next 30 years and immediately reduce our unfunded liability by at least 20%. There are several changes that will impact current and retired employees. Let me make it clear that all of the changes in this bill are prospective. We are not asking the systems to reduce current payments received by retired employees. Number one, future annual adjustments will be based on a retiree's years of service and the full CPI. Let me repeat, full CPI. The annual increase will be equal to 3% of years of service multiplied by $1,000 for those who are not coordinated with Social Security and $800 for those coordinated with Social Security. The $1,800 amounts will be adjusted each year by the full CPI. Those with an annuity less than their years of service multiplied by $1,000 or $800 or whatever the amount is at the time of retirement will receive a COLA equal to 3% compounded each year until their annuity reaches that amount. In some cases, a person's annuity will never reach that magic number, and they will continue to receive the 3% compounded COLA for life. For example, any non-coordinated retiree who worked for at least 20 years and retired with a final average salary of at least $42,000 will not see any changes to their COLA. Next, current employees will miss between 1 and 5 annual adjustments depending on age. Next, the Tier 2 pensionable salary cap will apply prospectively. The legislation grandfathers in salaries that currently exceed the cap and that will exceed the cap based on raises in a collective bargaining agreement. Next, the retirement age will be increased for those 45 years of age and under. For each year a member is under 46, the retirement age will be increased by 4 months up to 5 years. Next, employees will contribute 1% less of their salary toward their pension. With these changes, the state will adopt an actuarially sound funding schedule that will reduce the unfunded liability and establish level contributions. The new schedule will achieve 100% funding of the retirement systems no later than the end of fiscal year 2044. In addition to the annual contributions, the state will commit to providing supplemental funding for the retirement systems. Beginning in FY16, 10% of the annual savings resulting from pension reform will be contributed to the systems. In FY19, the state will contribute an additional $364 million and $1 billion annually until the systems reach 100% funding. These contributions will be pure add-ons, which means that the state's annual contributions will not be reduced by these amounts. If the state fails to make the annual contribution or a supplemental contribution, a retirement system will have the ability to file an action in the Illinois Supreme Court to force the state to meet its obligations. There are several other important parts of the bill worth mentioning. One, all pension matters, with the exception of pension pickups at local school districts, are removed from collective bargaining. Two, employees will have the option to join a defined contribution plan. Three, state pension systems will be prohibited from using pension funds to subsidize health care costs. I think it's important that we understand why we're here today talking about a change in the pension code. We're here today because the cost of the present state systems are simply too rich for the resources available to the state of Illinois to pay for those systems, in addition to meeting our obligations in areas such as education and social services. And it's important to note that the cost of these pensions have grown in recent years and will continue to grow. As an example, in FY8, the percentage of GRF appropriations dedicated to the pensions was 6%. 2 years later, in FY10, it was 12%. 2 years later, in FY12, it was 14%. In the current budget, FY14, it's 20%. It's estimated that in FY30, it'll be 23.5%. In FY40, it'll be 25.9%. And in FY45, it'll be 26.2%. Next, we ought to compare ourselves to what happens in our surrounding states. Surrounding states are more or less the same as Illinois. There are differences, but they're more or less the same as Illinois. And what we know is that Illinois leads the region in the amount of state-source revenue that we dedicate to our pensions. So as an example, we dedicate 14% of our state-source revenue to pensions. Kentucky contributes 11.6%, Indiana 6.9%, Missouri 4.9%, Iowa 1.6%, Wisconsin 1.3%. So we lead the region, but not in a category where we wish to lead. That gives us the background reason why we're here today and why we're contemplating this change. I think it's important to review a little history of this year and how we arrived at where we are today. We began this calendar year last January knowing that we had a severe problem with our pension systems. In the Democratic caucus, we engaged in an intense education program. We dedicated numerous caucuses to learning and understanding the problems with the funding of the pension system. And then all of us engaged in a series of test votes right here on the floor, where certain elements of this bill were offered as an amendment to a bill. They were debated, and we voted. And through that voting, we improved the education and the understanding of the serious nature of this problem. Next, the House passed a House pension bill, generally referred to as Senate Bill 1. In my judgment, House passage of that bill set the high bar of achievement in this exercise. Let's not forget, given the amount of money that we're dedicating to the cost of the pensions, given where we stand in the region, we're here today discussing the issue because of the cost. And what we want to do is to get cost savings as a result of this bill. And that's where the House bill set the high bar of $163 billion of cost savings. Later in the spring, the Senate passed Senate Bill 2404. It also changed the pension code. But the cost savings in that bill were in the neighborhood of $58 billion. And so again, we're involved in this exercise to achieve cost savings for the pension systems. House action had saved $163 billion. Senate action had saved $58 billion. I was severely criticized because I would not permit the calling of Senate Bill 2404. And I declined to call the bill because I wanted to shape the issue. I wanted people to have some time to understand the difference in cost savings between the two bills and to understand that our goal is to achieve the most cost savings feasible as a result of the legislation. In the last few weeks, I engaged in shuttle diplomacy with Senator Cullerton, Representative Durkin, Senator Radogno. We had some very fruitful discussions and negotiations. And at the end of those negotiations, I made two suggestions. The first suggestion was designed to meet a Senate Democratic objective. The Senate Democrats, throughout this discussion, had stated their strong interest in protecting the interest of workers. And they wanted to minimize the impact on workers as it would relate to the change in the COLA. So going back to the House bill, House action. In the House bill, we provided that going forward, the COLA would be flat. It wouldn't change. And that's where we achieved a great amount of our savings. Through the summer in the conference committee, there was discussion about adjusting the COLA by 1/2 of the consumer price index. And at one point there was discussion about a floor and a cap. And despite that suggestion in the conference committee, Senate Democrats continue to press their case to improve the functioning of the COLA. And so it was my suggestion that we go to the full consumer price index as an inflation adjuster on the COLA. That suggestion was accepted by the Senate Democrats. At the same time, Representative Durkin and Senator Radogno, to their credit, insisted very strongly that we continue to achieve a meaningful level of savings as a result of the bill. You may recall, House action had saved $163 billion. position of Mr. Durkin and Senator Radogno was that they would accept nothing less than $160 billion in savings. And to their credit, because they stood their ground, they got their wish in the negotiations. And we did that because of my second suggestion, which was to provide for supplemental funding where the bill provides that 10% of the savings coming out of the bill will be dedicated to the pension systems, and thereby the bill provides over $160 billion in savings. I want to also compliment Mr. Durkin in particular, along with Senator Radogno, for insisting that there be a strong legislative intent in the bill. This was another matter of great contention in the negotiations among the leaders. And Mr. Durkin in particular demanded that there be legislative intent and that there be very strong legislative content. And again, he got his wish, and I stood with him and with Senator Radogno so that we have the strong legislative intent in the bill that we think should be in the bill. Let me speak a little bit to the message that will come out of this bill. We begin, as we all know, something's got to be done. Something's got to be done. We can't go on dedicating so much of our resources to this one sector, pensions. Throughout the discussions, there was a very strong interest in protecting long-term low-income workers. Long-term low-income workers. That's done in this bill because the bill provides that up to a threshold level, there's no change. No change. We talked at length about the cost of what's referred to as the 3% compounded COLA. That's been identified as the chief cause of the financial problem. For the long-term, low-income worker up to a threshold level, no change, it's still there. So if your abiding interest is long-term, low-income workers, you should vote yes, because they're protected in the bill. Once the annuity hits the threshold level, the system changes. And there's a COLA present. And the COLA is pegged to the full consumer price index, just as the Social Security system is pegged to the full CPI. And so the message coming out of the bill is there must be a change. We will protect the long-term low-income workers. But for the remainder, they'll be little different than the vast majority of the nation, which is enrolled in the Social Security system. That's the message coming out of the bill. And then, to those that would object that too much of the cost savings comes from benefit reductions, it's simply not true. Everybody's been provided with charts that shows very conclusively that there's close to an equal division between benefit reductions and supplemental appropriations or new money being put in by the government. It's not exactly 50%. The benefit reductions are a tad under 50%. Supplemental appropriations are a tad over 50%. But the message is, this is not a one-sided bill. There will be changes here, much-needed changes. But this bill is a well-thought-out, well-balanced bill that deserves the support of this body State Senate, and the approval of Governor Quinn. And I would recommend an aye vote.
Speaker Madigan moves to adopt the first conference committee report on Senate Bill 1. Is there any discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the report. We're here today to take a monumental step, a step we can all look back on hopefully years from now and say that it really did help pull us out of our financial crisis. It's another and very significant component of achieving our long sought after fiscal stability. This has been a very long process. Representative Sanger and I were remarking this morning, we spent at least three sessions going through this. It's been a roller coaster, as many of you know, with some ups, a lot of downs. And during one of those periods when we got called back to session for yet another special session on this issue where nothing happened, I think my friend and colleague Daniel Biss put it quite well when he said we looked like idiots. But it was out of that frustration grew a group of legislators that stepped forward it's just about a year ago. It was December 5th last year when the group of 21 stood up and proposed House Bill 6258, which was a bold and yet pragmatic approach to addressing this problem. It has a lot of the same levers that we're looking at today in that legislation and looked very, I think in a lot of ways, set the table for what we're doing today. And I think this is a very good example of what legislators and a legislative body can do when individual members are willing to delve deep and find solutions. We've come a long way since the introduction of House Bill 6258, which morphed into a number of other bills, but obviously none of which passed either chamber. And so the conference committee set about its work, and we came a very long way. Again, a lot of what the conference committee did set the foundation for what we're looking at today. But ultimately, we turned it over to the legislative leaders to come up to produce this final agreement. As the chair of pensions and as a member of the conference committee, it's very clear that we have a crisis. We have a problem. We owe $100 billion. And we don't just owe that because if everyone retired today, we would have to come up with $100 billion. That's the amount that we should have in our account to allow it to grow to pay for those future benefits. We should have that money in our account today because then we can earn an adequate amount of interest to actually pay those benefits. We've looked at a lot of solutions, not only legislative solutions of the nature we're doing today, but as the conference committee, we invited a lot of folks who came to testify about new revenue proposals, different ways of looking at this issue, and a variety of things. So we've explored a variety of issues. But ultimately, I think this is the solution that is necessary. And these changes we're making today only go so far as necessary to achieve the goals that we need to achieve, as the speaker said, to get to an adequate level of savings so it's both affordable for taxpayers and sustainable for those expecting a pension. Finally, I do believe that this bill is constitutional, and while that will certainly be up to the Supreme Court to make that decision, we've given, I think, our lawyers a number of tools to use to argue this case before the Supreme Court so that it will be considered constitutional. I would like to just especially thank Speaker Madigan, who deserves, I think, some special acknowledgement for his dogged determination to see that we got this issue right. His insights and guidance, and as he so eloquently laid out, his suggestions in getting to yes were critical to this process. The other members of the conference committee, Representative Zaleski and Representative Turner, were determined colleagues as well as we went through this process. Leaders Durkin and Cross also played a critical role in getting in the development of this as it got to the point where we are today. And I'd also like to thank Representative Sanger for spending all those three sessions with me working on this, and Representative Tracy as well. The leadership of President Cullerton, Leader Radonio, Senators Raoul, Holmes, and Murphy and Brady also were, I think, the conference committee as a whole really worked very well together, came together to really solve a problem, and committed their time and their efforts in good faith. I can't let this go without saying a big thank you to Daniel Biss. Last time we did this, he was standing here, and I started to cry, so I won't have to do that today since he's not standing here. But he has been the person who has provided strength and guidance and the math expertise, as he so eloquently did in conference committee this morning, to get us to this point. And I can't thank him enough, and can't and value his friendship more than I can possibly say. I recognize that today this is a very tough vote, and I've, like many of you, have heard from countless retirees and workers just how difficult this is. I empathize with each and every one of them, and I don't take any joy in this action today. Yet it's the responsible thing to provide for a pension system that gives workers retirement security without bankrupting our state. Just yesterday, I received an email from a constituent who I think put it much more eloquently than I probably ever could, and I'm going to excerpt from it a little bit, but this is what he said. I'm a local union member. I support your reform efforts on the pension system. Please help find a solution to this mess we are in. My only fear is that the legislature will not do enough. Recently, our local has undergone pension reforms to preserve the fund for retirees. Hard choices were made that would affect people's retirement benefits, but it needed to be done. If you speak with the average taxpayer on the street, I'm sure they would agree with me. Sometimes you have to be like Paul Simon and just do what you think is right. The current path is unsustainable. This is a gentleman who lives not far from me in my home community. As we take this vote today, our work is far from over. We must pay down our unpaid bills, address the upcoming expiration of the tax increase, and meet our commitment to taxpayers to get the most out of their investment in our vital services: education, healthcare, social services, transportation. We all have our favorite one. But this is one fundamental step to making all of those decisions easier and to protecting our pension systems so that they have a more secure future. Illinois will be better tomorrow because of our actions today. I want to thank everybody for supporting a stronger state with your yes vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor will yield.
Today in my email, I got an email from Jim, who lives in West Chicago. And he actually said that I'm trying to understand the impact of the pension reform bill. To say the least, specifics are in short supply. And he had a number of questions, so I thought they were good. First of all, he wants to know, why would employees be required to contribute 1% less? They are the ones getting the benefit, which is already much more generous than what is available to employees in the private sector. Shouldn't they have to contribute more?
The reduction in the employee contribution was put into the bill as part of the items of consideration that were put in the bill for purposes of the arguments before the Illinois Supreme Court. We've been concerned from day one that before the Illinois Supreme Court, the argument against the bill would be that it just hurts the workers, that cost savings were taken from the workers. And so the reduction in the employee's contribution has been put in the bill for the purpose of showing consideration before the court.
Before we had a 2% increase in employee contribution, what is the swing in that 3% differential? What is that in terms of money that will not be put into the system?
I don't have an answer. I don't have a numerical answer for you in that regard. I think you can appreciate that from the beginning to the end, there were multiple items that were debated and discussed for inclusion in the bill, with the ultimate goal of achieving $160 billion in cost savings. And so if there was a loss of cost savings because of a change on employee contributions, it was made up when in the end we moved to the idea that 10% of the savings coming out of the bill would be dedicated to the pension system.
Okay, in that same vein, Jim asks, whenever government bases a solution on a projection that is 30 years out, I have to laugh. how can they know that it will be fully funded by 2044?
The answer is that in preparing this bill, we worked with the experts that we knew to help advise us on the bill. As an example, we went to the pension systems. The pension systems all employ actuaries. And every one of these ideas was sent over to the pension systems, where we would ask the system, work with your actuary and give us your best estimate as to what the impact or the cost will be. We went to the best place we could find.
I understand that it just seems that initially SB1 was told to save $187 billion, and then afterwards we found out it was only $163 billion. There was a $24 billion swing after additional analysis was done. I'm just wondering if we're going to be faced with that same sort of reduction in real savings after additional analysis is done on this proposal. We just don't know. I mean, if that's the answer, that you can say that.
I agree with you in this respect. We worked with the pension systems. Our relationship with the pension systems was not perfect. We were not always happy with the nature of their response or the timeline on their response. And that's why the legislature, in its wisdom just a few years ago, provided that the Office of the Auditor General, which is a legislative office, is now today the Office of the State Actuary. So we in the legislature have one of our offices, the Office of the Auditor General, available to go to and to ask that office, working with the Office of the State Actuary, which is part of their jurisdiction, give us what you think the numbers are. So today, at least we're in a position where we've got someplace where we can go and we can get our good expert opinion.
Have we gone there and gotten our good expert opinion yet?
We haven't, not on this bill. We've been working with
Okay.
all this information that's come to us, but this is a question which may come later in debate. And Representative Durkin and I have talked about this, why I'm prepared to take a position that we would call upon that office in short order to come in here and tell us, is this being done correctly? Are there errors that we ought to correct? I'm prepared to do that and to support that.
Okay, that's good. Just a couple more questions here. Jim says private businesses have moved from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. The same should be done with government pensions. The real reform that is needed is to cap the current pension and move future employees to a defined contribution plan. We only have a small component of that. Why is it not a larger component? This is my part of the question. Why are we only taking a 5% from Tier 1 to go to a DC component?
Yeah. Because this was a negotiated bill, there were basically four parties at interest debating and negotiating the bill, and the idea that the bill would provide for a defined contribution element was advanced strongly by Mr. Durkin and Senator Radogno. That's why the item is in the bill. It could have been more, but as I said, we were in negotiations, and we were attempting to come to an agreement on a bill that could pass both houses of the General Assembly.
Okay, so would you call this defined contribution equivalent to a 401k?
You hear that question? Could you repeat the question?
Would you say that this defined contribution plan for the 5% is equivalent to a 401k?
The answer is yes, and let me hasten to point out that the inclusion of the defined contribution element in the bill is another item of consideration for the court.
And also, we don't know for sure what that's going to look like. Is it going to look like the CSRS, where they have an 8%, 7% contribution, or we haven't defined yet what the DC looks like. Is that correct?
You're correct, but my attorney advises me that it will be pretty much similar to what happens at SURS.
Okay, that's fine. I get that. Would you consider 401k private property?
I don't know that I understand your question.
let me explain it then. Because in this particular bill, it says that you can, at will, terminate the defined contribution plan and take back not only the members' contributions to their own 401k, but also all of the earnings. You can terminate it at will. And this, to me, is something a rogue nation run by despots would do. They would take private property and put it back into another plan.
Whoa.
Hey, I got a whoa. Okay. We're gonna
My
stop and
my
think.
lawyer advises that that section of the bill operates if the bill is found to be unconstitutional.
But that's not what the language says. It says terminates or is found to be inoperative by the courts. It says one or the other, and so the language is not precise. So it looks like to me that you could literally take, and you know, maybe some of these 5% people that want to go in this 401k have a valid reason. Because even though TRS returned 12.8%, in that same time frame, the S&P 500 returned over 18%. Maybe they want to be a more savvy investor. And it'd be shameful if we just decided then that this private property can be put back into a system that, if you look at what happened in Detroit today, can potentially end up in pensioners losing half of their pension. So that's my concern. If you set up a 401k, it should be something that they own entirely. And that's not the case under this bill. Is that correct or not?
Well, let me answer your question by addressing the body as a matter of legislative intent.
That would be great. That's what I'm trying to get here on the floor, is some legislative intent.
So my statement on legislative intent is that this section that we are discussing right now would be invalidated in the event, only in the event, that the Illinois Supreme Court finds the bill to be unconstitutional.
Okay, very good. That's the end of my questions, but I do want to make a statement. Many comments have been made on the House floor over the past few years concerning the dire financial stress our state is under. We had the dubious honor of being selected by the State Budget Crisis Task Force, a group comprised of leaders in government and academia from throughout the United States, for a comprehensive analysis of our financial state. In 2012, they wrote this about Illinois. Illinois' budget is not fiscally sustainable. At the onset of the 2008 financial crisis, Illinois was essentially insolvent. It has only gotten worse. Illinois faces a number of daunting budgetary challenges and is among the worst states in the nation with regard to its fiscal condition. The state needs to change how it does business. The culture of budget gimmickry and short-sightedness pushes costs off to the future, but eventually that will be impossible. Retirees may lose their pensions as the funds dwindle. Low-income and disabled people may lose their health care as costs escalate. And citizens and businesses seeking a stable environment may face steep and sudden tax increases. It would be better for Illinois, these are their words, to start on a long-run path to sustainable budget than to live beyond its means for several more years and then face a sudden, painful reckoning. I repeat their comments to underscore that in Illinois, bold policy decisions are in order. It is also common knowledge that our credit rating is the worst in the United States, but we are not just the worst. We are the worst by a long shot. When Illinois goes to the market to borrow, we pay over 3 times more in interest costs than the next worst state. We don't have time for small reform, but today that is what is before us, and we cannot vote for small reform. In an October 21st, 2013 editorial, the Chicago Tribune said this about the previous bills proposed last spring by the Senate President and the House Speaker. They said, none of these plans is ambitious enough to completely solve the mathematical problem of too many pension promises and too little money. The plan before you today is also not ambitious enough, providing even less savings than SB 1, and this plan does not solve the math problem with any certainty. A month later, on November 20th, the Chicago Tribune called for leaders to go big on pension reform because we cannot tax, borrow, or invest our way out of a debt this big. The editors included the following statement: the legislative leaders need to come up with a solid, substantial, heavy on savings reform plan for the state's pension funds. Then they need to use that as a template for the cities, school districts, and other government agencies that face their own pension crisis. All that debt is on the taxpayers. It grows and grows. This bill does not go big, and it is not substantial or solid. Instead, this bill ensures that the state will have to tax or borrow in the future to pay pensions and then cross our fingers and wish upon a star for solid investment returns every year just to keep up with pension funding. This bill asks taxpayers to pay a bigger share of the base pension for every retiree while asking government workers to pay less. Completely opposite of what we passed a mere 2 weeks ago for the Chicago Park District, when we called that reform too. This bill still allows TRS employees to retire in their late 50s after only 30 years of service, while the taxpayers that fund this will work nearly a decade longer. This bill continues to hand out average pensions of over $2 million plus, while employees contribute a fraction of the cost, in TRS an average of about $120,000, and most retirees within the first 3 years of retirement will have received back all of their contributions. Taxpayer contributions and investment returns are then expected to keep paying retirees for the next 25 years that most will live. Under this bill, there is no shared risk, and taxpayers continue to cover all poor investment returns while also putting in most of the contribution. This bill reduces our unfunded liability at best by 20%, taking us back to 2011 levels, when the crisis caused the Democrats to pass a huge tax increase. And yet our fiscal situation is not better, but instead worse than before the tax increase. Unbelievably, this bill lets the state take back 401k assets. If you happen to be one of the 5% that get into the optional 401k for Tier 1, be wary. The state can terminate the 401k at any time and take all assets back. If we were serious about implementing a heavy on savings reform plan, we would look to Rhode Island, a very democratic state, for an example of where to start. Rhode Island's pension reform immediately decreased their unfunded liability by over 40%. Their real reforms included moving all current workers into a hybrid program, not optional, of both defined benefits and defined contributions. They extended retirement ages over time up to the Social Security age of 67. And they generally suspended all COLAs for retirees until the system is 80% funded. And they introduced shared risk in benefit payments. Real, respectful reform is possible. I've heard from retirees and government workers, many of who don't even live in my district. And you have every right to be angry as long as it's properly directed at the politicians and union leadership that made the promises we cannot keep. They promised your contributions would be sufficient to cover a fair portion of the benefit when they only cover on average less than 10% of the payout. The politicians often failed to fund their share, and your unions agreed to use borrowing to catch up, which never works. They promised increased benefits that were never adequately factored into the contribution formula, thereby exacerbating the problem. And the most egregious, they allowed outsiders, local politicians, union leaders, and others to access your pension systems without paying their fair share. Now your pensions are in jeopardy. And it is interesting that today a bankruptcy judge is determining what will happen to pensioners in Detroit, and actually has determined that those pensions can be cut, despite all the guarantees that they had. So this bill is not a solution, and whether this bill passes or not, either way, state-funded pensions are in jeopardy. Both insufficient reform and no reform will lead to the same result. We cannot continue to spend 20% of general revenues on public pensions when most states spend only 5% and remain an attractive place to live and do business. Doing so will lead to tax increases or drastic cuts to service, which means layoffs, or all three. It also means business choose other places to locate or expand, and it also means taxpayers will flee to better economies. Those of us who remain in the state will be incapable of, and quite frankly, unwilling to pay for outsized pensions. To vote for something just because we've been told this is it, this is our chance at reform, or in response to a media frenzy over this underwhelming bill is short-sighted. Today, I ask my fellow legislators to not vote for marginal reforms, but to put retiree pensions, that put retiree pensions in jeopardy, are unaffordable to taxpayers, and erode our ability to balance budgets fairly. We do need pension reform immediately, but not just any pension reform. And we certainly don't want to pass a bill or any bill just to find out what's in it. I ask you to vote no, and beginning tomorrow, to work towards real, meaningful reform. Thank you. I urge a no vote.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. Number one, I want to mention a few things in this bill that are very solid, and it's a result of a policy we put in place pretty much 3 years ago when we started working on this problem. And that has to do with not kicking the can down the road again and using true actuarial numbers, which we are. So we're going to solve this thing once and for all. So hopefully tomorrow, when the bond houses open up, they'll look at the state of Illinois and say, finally you did something and got it done and you're going to move forward. And that's what this bill is about. There's some good, this bill is not perfect, but there's some very good policy in this bill. One of the policies that we brought to the table, and I want to thank Leader Durkin for bringing it, also is the 401k component. Today, except for the university system, there's no choice, particularly for the teacher system, to say if you want a pension or a 401k. So this opens for current employees the opportunity to move in a 401k. That's good policy. And that's a conservative policy that many of the conservative organizations have been asked for. So this is a move in the right direction, and it's a very good gain for everyone. Secondly, there's something else that's working through here which is important. It's going to bring stabilization not only to our fund going forward, but to our businesses. And we're going to have a piece of legislation in place that now, and coming up in the spring, our businesses, our school districts, and everyone else can open up to say, hey, we know what is going to go on in the state of Illinois. We have gone home, I don't know how many times now, with a failure to pass a bill. And this is the furthest we have come along. This bill is not a weak bill. This bill is not perfect, but this bill is in no way a weak bill. So I am in support of this bill. I would ask for your aye vote on this bill. And if we walk home again and not get this done, I can guarantee tomorrow morning, not only are we going to be a laughingstock again with the bond houses, but with all our businesses, our school districts, and our individuals in the homes that are saying, hey, Illinois, you've got to get something done and make it happen. And on the final note, and this is in regards to those who are in the system, the public employees and the teachers, our whole intent here, and this is why we're using actuarial numbers and we're not kicking the can down the road, is to make sure you have a pension until you no longer need it. And that's what this bill is doing. Thank you.
Representative Sendek.
Mr. Speaker, a couple questions of Speaker Madigan, please.
Sponsor will yield.
Speaker, you mentioned in your opening comments about the $160 billion in anticipated savings over the 30-year period. And I thought I heard you say in answer to questions of another speaker that that's from the actuaries from the systems themselves. Is that correct?
I think it's fair to say that it's a composite number that was generated through joint action of the staffs for the 4 legislative caucuses, working in conjunction with the information that came from the pension systems.
And Speaker, you mentioned in anticipation of other questions, and frankly one of them was mine, about the propriety perhaps of using outside actuaries or other consultants to maybe look at it. Is Kafka considered a possibility to run these numbers as well?
They would be. They would be.
Speakers, some other speakers spoke to the constitutionality of the issue, and on this floor, whether it was in the weekly orders of business, on other pension votes, that's always a question of concern to all conscientious legislators. I don't think I heard you speak to it. Are you confident that you believe this bill to be constitutional, sir?
Representative, my view is that this bill will be approved by the Illinois Supreme Court, and I say that based upon the excellent advice of my attorney, Heather.
I had a
She's
feeling
right
you would
there.
say that. Yes, sir. I suspect others may have opined as well. Sir, what happens if we don't pass this bill? Do you expect the credit agencies may chime in on this issue again?
Well, clearly the bill is responsive to concerns and objections raised by the credit agencies in the past. Our hope is that they're fully satisfied or greatly satisfied. But, you know, what they do is outside of our control once we've passed the bill.
Let me ask it another way then, Speaker. If the bill doesn't pass, do you expect the credit agencies will have another negative look at the state's credit worthiness?
Well, I certainly hope not.
To the report, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate all that have been involved in bringing this bill forward. I know many on my side of the aisle feel it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't do enough. It's not bold enough, big enough. I understand those concerns, and I recognize them, and in many instances I appreciate them and wish the bill did more. But that's not going to be the case today, and in the short run, it's not going to be the case tomorrow either. There are others that say the bill goes too far, it does too much, it's too drastic, it cuts too much. So perhaps, just perhaps, today as we stand here, we have a report or a bill that does enough to move forward, that offers the right first step towards reforming these pension systems, stabilizing them, and making them financially sustainable. Because as I've said before, and other more eloquent speakers have said before, if we don't stabilize these pensions, there's no fixing the fiscal future of this state and turning Illinois back to a prosperous state. So I support this report in the bill, and I ask my colleagues on this side of the aisle particularly to take into effect and recognize where we are, literally and figuratively, with this bill or report. Could we do better? Is it realistic under current circumstances to have a better bill? I suggest that's not the case. Furthermore, I suggest that this is a good incremental step, and to do nothing, to say no, is tantamount to letting $100 billion in unfunded liabilities go unaddressed, to let $5 million in daily increases to that unfunded liability continue going forward. I think that's a dereliction of our duty. Would I like a better bill? I would. Is this good enough for right now? I suggest it is. Last, there was a speaker that pointed to the Chicago Tribune as authority for big, bold pension reform. I concur. That same authority, such that it is, the Tribune op page, suggested today, Tuesday, that's today, is a yes-no moment. We cannot say yes to a pension system doomsday that will almost certainly occur, that will unfold in a few years. We cannot support any excuse that resembles head in the sand, bury. We cannot support political calculus and lawmakers' self-interest trumping the needs of real pensioners, real taxpayers, real workers, real employees who are relying on lawmakers to address this, not to offer up excuse after excuse. Lawmakers, be the solution. Stabilize this state's future, its credit rating, and its business climate. Vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Durkin to close, and Leader Durkin and Speaker Madigan to close. Is there anyone else wishing to seek recognition on this point? No? With that said, Leader Durkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past few months, Speaker Madigan, Senate President Cullerton, Leader Radonio, and myself have discussed fixing the state retirement systems at great length. To say reaching an agreement has been difficult would be, to say reaching an agreement this difficult is an understatement. As a group, we painstakingly reviewed various proposals derived from the Conference Committee report, other pension reform bills, such as Senate Bill 1, which was championed and supported by my predecessor, Tom Cross, in an effort to find common areas of consensus and optimize savings. Movement at times was slow. It's because each and every time we made an adjustment to one of the concepts, even minor, it had the potential to dramatically alter the actuarial numbers provided by the pension systems. That went on and on and on. But it was responsible. We had to do it. But we collectively felt it was important that the numbers be as accurate as possible before we came to you seeking your vote, which is what we're doing today. I can tell you this, I have a family member who's an actuary, spent about 20 years taking tests after she graduated from college. They have the highest of fiduciary standards. Some people are critical of them, but I will say that we need to put reliance within what our actuaries tell us. The conference committee report, SB1, will save in the range of $160 billion over the course of 30 years. This is real money. This is not monopoly money. The savings are significant, and more importantly, it sustains the viability of these systems. Under this proposal, the systems will achieve 100% full funding by the end of 2044. Bennett reforms to the COLA, a pensionable salary cap, a higher retirement age for those under 46 are necessary to stabilize our pension systems and to control and reduce our unfunded pension liability, which is the worst in the nation. I will also say there was discussion about this supposed guarantee, and I will say that on balance, it's correct measure. It's a correct component. It provides flexibility to a fiscally prudent governor and a fiscally prudent legislature to make their payments to the system and also to pay the necessities of government. But what it also protects the legislature from, and the taxpayers importantly, are the examples and the abuses and the rogue actions of governors and legislatures, which we've seen over the years, by giving the systems the abilities to say, no, you can't do this, no more holidays. And that's what we're doing in that provision. Because of our insistence, that's Senator Radogno and myself, up to 5% of active state employees will have the option of controlling their own retirement and can choose to participate in a defined contribution plan. This is a victory. This is something that our side of the aisle has asked for and pleaded with for years. What made it possible for us to be here today was a sense of urgency by all leaders that if nothing is done, the credit agencies will continue to impose further downgrades to our state, which makes it cost prohibitive to borrow and will ultimately damage our economic and job climate and put it in even worse condition. Illinois already has the worst credit rating of any other state and the highest unemployment of any state in our region and in the Midwest. And today, failure to act today will assuredly move our credit rating even lower if it is possible. And I guess we'll just have to find out if we don't pass that bill. I believe that's reprehensible if that's the situation. No one wants to be here, but we have no choice. There was tremendous give and take during the course of these negotiations, and that's what this body's about, and that's what this process is about. Well, I will say that this bill is not perfect. It's a good bill, but it is the best bill that we are going to see for such a long time if we do not pass this bill today. I will say that we acted and we negotiated in good faith because we all believe a sense of urgency. It has nothing to do with politics. I've heard criticism and I've heard comments, but the fact is politics have absolutely no place with the condition of our pension system, with the billions of dollars that are at stake. We need to act on the merits of the bill itself. There are so many good things in this bill opposed to the questionable parts that people have brought up, and that is the basis for why you should vote yes. I could believe, and I will tell you this, that I think that if we also do not take action today, it just makes it that much more likely that a tax increase will be necessary. Let's try to avoid that. Now, I think it's ironic today that the Detroit bankruptcy judge, and was mentioned earlier, did rule that the city of Detroit is eligible for bankruptcy protection. And I will tell you what, our failure to act and to move in a positive manner like today could ultimately put these systems in the same position as the city of Detroit, and shame on us if that occurs. I want to thank all who participated in this issue going back 3 years ago to all the members on the pension committee, members of the conference committee, and more importantly to our staff who work tireless day and night because they're doing it for the right reason, because they believe in Illinois, they believe we have a brighter future ahead, and so do I. Vote yes.
Speaker Madigan to close.
Mr. Speaker, before I begin, let me advise the body that the report has been adopted by the Senate. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to read into the record a statement for the purpose of legislative intent. The fiscal problems facing our state and our retirement systems are no surprise to anyone, and finding a solution is no small task. This conference committee report is the culmination of years of work and months of hard negotiations among the four caucuses. Despite the rhetoric, we have spent countless hours consulting with all of the stakeholders and took everyone's suggestions into consideration. The intent of the bill is to address the problem in a manner that is fair to those impacted, including employees, retirees, and the taxpayers. As a result, the bill only includes changes that were determined to be absolutely necessary. In my opinion, and I believe many of you agree, the state of Illinois is in a fiscal crisis, and we need to take immediate action. I applaud that our members have searched for options and proposed ideas that could help minimize this crisis. Over the past few years, we have increased the income tax. We created a Tier 2 retirement system that provides less generous benefits, and we have made very painful, deep cuts to programs that are essential to the health, safety, welfare, and educational development of the people of the state of Illinois. But it hasn't been enough. Raising taxes alone, cutting state spending alone, or a combination of the two alone won't solve the problem. Continuing to do nothing will further erode the state's credit rating and our ability to attract and maintain businesses and people that generate revenue for the state. This amendatory act of the 98th General Assembly is intended to address the fiscal issues of the state and its retirement systems in a manner that is realistically feasible, consistent with the Illinois Constitution, and fair to both the taxpayers and the employees impacted by these changes. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, first I want to thank and highly compliment people on our side of the aisle. First, Representative Nekritz, the chair of our pension committee, the person who has been the engine behind all of this effort to reform the pension system, giving to the effort tireless time and effort and energy and dedication, and she has done a wonderful, wonderful job. In addition, my other two appointments to the conference committee, that gentleman standing up at the podium there, Mr. Turner, and Mr. Zaleski over here to the left. I want to compliment and thank our attorney, Heather, her assistant, Larry Dirks, and all of the other staff that were involved in this project among the Democrats. I want to thank and compliment Representative Durkin. He did an excellent job in the negotiations. He's done an excellent job of working with his members to persuade them to vote for the bill. I want to compliment Representative Singer and Representative Tracy and their staffer, Andrew Freiheit. Mr. Speaker, I think we've debated long enough. I think it's time that we all vote aye. Thank you.
The question is, shall the House adopt the first conference committee report on Senate Bill 1? Those in favor signify by voting aye. Those opposed by voting nay. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? The clerk shall take the record. On a count of 62 voting yes, 53 voting no, and 1 voting present, the House does adopt the first conference committee report on Senate Bill 1, and this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.